Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. On behalf of USAID, Feed the Future, AgriLinks, and ResilienceLinks, I want to welcome you to our joint webinar, Strengthening Local Capacity Through Geo-Enabling Technologies. I am Michael Saltz with AgriLinks, and before we begin, I want to orient you to our Zoom event. On the bottom of your screen, you're going to see your controls. Please use the chat to introduce yourself and network with colleagues from around the world. To ask questions, please use the Q&A button in the toolbar on the left and indicate who your question is for. You can ask questions to the full group if you'd like. You can ask questions throughout the event, and our Q&A session will be at the end of the webinar. Lastly, we are recording this webinar and will email you the post-event resources with the full slide deck as soon as they're available. You can also find the resources at agrilinks.org and our YouTube channel when they are ready. Thank you for your attention. I'll now pass it to USAID's Alejo Valencia.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here with us for this exciting webinar jointly hosted by AgriLinks and ResilienceLinks on strengthening local capacity through geo-enabling technologies. As Michael said, my name is Alejandro Valencia. I'm the Senior Knowledge Management and Organizational Learning Advisor for the Feed the Future Office of Policy, Analysis and Engagement at USAID. And I have the pleasure of introducing today's panel and speakers. So to start us off, we're going to have Sukaina Kane, Director of Fragility, Conflict and Violence at the World Bank. Then we're going to have, as our first speaker, Bahar Salimova, Senior Operations Officer and Program Manager at Fragility, Conflict and Violence, also at the World Bank Group. Then after that, we're going to hear from Mokshana Veyeratina. She's the Environmental Specialist in the Environment and Natural Resources Global Practice at the World Bank. Then Dr. Abdu Ali, who is the Senior Hydrologist Specialist, Head of the Information and Research Department, AgriMet Regional Center. After that, we're gonna speak to Dr. Shat Shukla, Associate Researcher, Climate Hazard Center at UCSB. Then our last speaker is going to be Kyle Alden, GIS Specialist at the Resilience, Environment and Food Security Bureau at USAID. And then to close us off, we're going to have Carrie Stokes, who is the Chief Geographer and Geocenter Director at USAID. So with that, I'm going to pass on the mic to Sukaina for opening statements.
Thank you very much, Alejandro, and greetings to you all. Welcome to this event on strengthening local capacity through geo-enabling technology. Thank you for those joining us online from different parts of the world, representing many organizations and countries. I'm Sukaina Khan. I'm the Global Director of Fragility, Conflict and Violence at the World Bank. And I'm very pleased to open this webinar today, and would like really to thank USAID and NASA for hosting this event together with the World Bank. Our partnership with USAID in FCV context is strong and linked to our World Bank FCV strategy, and the US Government Fragility Act. Overall, as we all know, the world is facing rapidly deteriorating situation in many countries, which require action and new solutions. We see that progress in global extreme poverty reduction has stalled, in particular in what we call fragile and conflict situation, in fragile and conflict affected states. Many developing countries and fragile countries are facing increasing debt vulnerabilities. Across the world, people face widespread food insecurity, water and energy scarcity. We see that forcibly displaced people are on the rise as well. Geopolitical tensions are increasing, and the climate crisis is an existential threat. to people on the planet, and a threat multiplier for fragility, conflict, and violence. These crises, many with impacts across borders, they do require not only a massive and urgent change in what we do, but as well in how we work together to support countries and address these global challenges. At the World Bank, what we're trying to do is really to translate this urgency into what we call a new playbook to drive meaningful development and lead to a better quality of life, jobs, and a cleaner planet. So as we are pursuing our revised mission is to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity in a livable planet. And it is critical that we work in countries experiencing fragility, conflict, and violence, that we call FCV in short. By 2030, 60% of extremely poor people will live in FCV countries. And our experience in implementing the FCV strategy has made it clear. In insecure or hard to reach areas, innovative technologies have a great potential to bring positive change and allow us to remain engaged. After taking stock of our strategy implementation during the midterm review, we also realized that we would need to be more adaptable in our operation in fast changing situation. We need, second, to close the knowledge gaps, especially on supporting prevention and resilience. We need to anticipate more on fragility and conflict, and we need to build stronger partnership to address the development impacts of violence and insecurity, building on our synergies. And we also know that reaching rural communities we serve is not always easy. It's not always easy, especially in regions where fragility, conflict, and violence are extreme. In that sense, geo-enabling tools have a great power in the development landscape, and it becomes a game changer in confronting FCV challenges. It helps us, as I said, in our objective of remaining engaged, even in the most difficult situation. So the World Bank is increasingly using geospatial data across FCV contexts. The production and use of maps, dynamic dashboards, and advanced spatial analysis are informing operation and allowing us to expand our analytics. One important World Bank tool is the Geo-Enabling Initiative for Monitoring and Supervision. We call it GEMS in short. It builds local capacity in digital data collection and analysis to allow for real-time project monitoring, assessment of progress, and adapt our risk management. GEMS as well helps provide insights into areas where access is limited due to active conflict, high insecurity, or simply logistical constraints. So let me give you two examples from project finance by the World Bank that have applied the geospatial tools through GEMS. In Niger, we have a climate smart agriculture support project dedicated to bolstering climate resilience, improving agriculture productivity, and providing crisis responses. After receiving training, the project team has been able to utilize geospatial technologies to gather valuable data and monitor around 2,000 intervention sites in real time, which helps with adaptive management and enhanced responsiveness. Another example, in Bangladesh, the geo-enabling technology was used to streamline data collection and promote data-driven decision for livestock farmers as part of a COVID-19 response operation. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the Bangladesh Livestock and Dairy Development Project sprang into action, compensating livestock farmers for their losses. And within 6 weeks, the project team collected detailed gender disaggregated data over 70,000 beneficiaries, enabling a prompt and effective response. We'll hear more. I have compelling examples and experience from panelists soon, but we can do more. It's within our control to leverage these tools for faster and more cost-effective project monitoring and evaluation, and more importantly, to make sure that we build local capacity so the governments will be able to take on this technology and apply them across the board. We need increased action through collaboration and partnership. And being here today with USAID and NASA is a great example of our common quest of joining forces and scaling up our collective efforts. We hope this cross-agency knowledge sharing will help us better understand our tools and technology, as well as needs to collect that we have to collectively and urgently address. In closing, I really encourage you all of actively engaging in discussion, pose questions, share ideas, share new ideas, challenge us on how we could do better. And let me now hand over to Bahar Salimova, Senior Operation Officer at the World Bank, who will be presenting next in the webinar. Wish you an excellent and productive session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Soukaina, so much for this great opening for us and for actually giving us a flavor of GEMS. Good evening, good morning, good day to everyone who joined. Thanks for joining. I see we have over 270 people online. Thank you so much for joining today, and we're looking forward to a great exchange. I wanted to just introduce our initiative. As Soukaina mentioned, it's just one of the initiatives in the World Bank working on some of the geo-enabled technologies and tools and geospatial work. We are housed in the Fragility, Conflict and Violence Group, which we call FCV, led by Soukaina, who just gave us the opening remarks. And if we go to the next slide, a little bit about us. We are supported by the Korean Trust Fund and the Global Trust Fund for Peace Building and Partnerships for Sustainable Development Goals. And if on the next slide, you will see a little bit how we approach our work. I think all of you who are here have some knowledge of the geo data and geospatial data, but just very briefly, if we go to the next slide, please. To mention that there are many ways of thinking about it and why geo-enabled technologies are as useful as they're growing to become on both the policy work and development work. But basically, when we say geo data, be it geospatial or otherwise, it means locating something on Earth, right? And then how you do it, it's that's how you think of it. But it's what on Earth, where on Earth, but also why, right? And the creating the link between what, where, and why is key to us. So we are in the GEMS initiative, we're using, and we're coming together for to use various technologies, geospatial, geo-enabled, geosensing as GIS, all together to create the what, where, why linkages. And in our particular case, we're using very simple and open source technologies to ensure that there is a greater uptake on the ground, but also to connect the more granular data of what, where, and create these patterns from the very ground level view, right? But then when we're starting to analyze to understand the why part, we are using the geospatial components. We're using this rocket science and the socket science all together to create that linkage. So for that, we're, as Soukaina mentioned, we're partnering both internally and externally with the European Space Agency, for example, with the World Bank's its own data lab and geospatial initiative to create a more holistic understanding of and analyze what the data is telling us when we are creating this capacity. And on the next slide, if you could go to the next slide. So the way we work in the GEMS initiative, we're basically building capacity for our client governments and the project implementing units. We as a team do not collect the data ourselves or hold the data, but rather empower those who are implementing the project and do the day-to-day work and live in these countries to ensure that the development goes forward, that the communities flourish. They know how to monitor the progress. They are able to provide adaptive management when the things need to change. They're also able to monitor risk. So our main task is to develop the capacity on the ground or to utilize low-cost technologies to collect the data then to understand the data, curate the data, and then to visualize the data for themselves. And then this allows us to also move many of those who are part of our capacity building program from a paper-based data collection to a digital data collection. And again, we're using very simple technologies. We're trying to ensure that in the fragile and conflict environments where institutional capacity is low, resources are low, we're ensuring that what we're using is accessible technologies such as phones, in some cases tablets, but less so, because phone penetration is much higher. And so that they can actually utilize it on the spot and share the data through a centralized platform. And if we go to the next slide, just a bit of a flavor we use Kobo Toolbox aligned with many other development agencies. UN is using a version of it as well to collect such data, so to enable our clients to collect such data. So we teach and build capacity on how to utilize this. And then we are also progressing into using data analytics in Power BI and ArcGIS, and then when needed in QGIS as well. This is just, again, to bring that idea of not just having the data and understanding what is where, but also what does it mean to us as development practitioners, as government policymakers, but most importantly, as people implementing these initiatives on the ground. And for the Kobo Toolbox, it's our main tool. We're not vested to it necessarily for all of our engagement, but it is our main tool for one reason, is that it's open source, so there is no fees associated with it. It's easily downloadable. It's also easily scalable because the ease of use of it, the uptake of the tool itself is great and very high. It also lives on a UNHCR approved and secured servers. And again, it's been used not just by us, but many development agencies, even in conflicts such as Ukraine, ongoing conflicts such as in the Ukraine and elsewhere, for tracking refugees, understanding the dynamics on the ground, and also doing the risk management on the ground. So over to the next slide, please. Next, again, just to give you a flavor and continue building on what Sukaina was mentioning on some of our examples. So we are not only focusing on a particular type of project or particular governments or particular sectors, we're actually providing this as a tool for capacity building for many different purposes: environmental tracking, citizen engagement, COVID tracking when it was needed, grievances, redress mechanisms, gender dynamics, and many more engagements. So in the next slide, I wanted to share a quick example to build on what Sukaina was saying about Bangladesh. Another engagement in Bangladesh that we had during COVID time was helping them to further develop the economic parity in the country between West and East. And so we were supporting a program called We Care, which helped the two regions of the country connect the development dots by sharing the common data and collecting the data along the development construction. So this was a built up or transformation of a 260-kilometer highway into an economic corridor. It was a network of markets and rural roads. And for that, the team worked with us, the government worked with us to establish a centralized digital platform to understand how the physical infrastructure building is going from one stage to another, taking the pictures of the infrastructure built up, ensuring that it's going as planned, but also, which is an important aspect here, to surveying market dynamics. So over 2,000 surveys, if I'm not mistaken, was collected as part of what's happening in the market. Are the market getting access to this newly built roads? How are the markets benefiting or not benefiting from this development? So this was key, especially as the project was being implemented and rolled out. And then since the training also, there was a performance checklist developed together with us, and the government was able to understand what are some feedback from the beneficiaries coming through, right? Is there any issues with construction and displacement, any safeguard issues that the government needs to, so in real time was able to monitor the implementation of the project, but more so if there are any issues that arose, there was a real-time feedback loop built into this important corridor development. For the next slide, I wanted, and then in the interest of time, very briefly mention the education project, just to give a flavor that what's possible to do in various sectors. This is a project we worked with in Angola. When we started the project data and the particular data on schools was collected on paper. So there was no a digital platform or even digital way of knowing where are the schools across the country. So we help the government and the project to create a tool and then subsequently a platform to map these schools across the country. And I believe about over 4,000 schools were mapped across the country. But as a second component to this, as a second stage, because there was a desire to know whether the teachers are benefiting from the training program and how they're benefiting from this training program, as well as whether the essential services are being delivered at the school as promised. We've built in capacity of surveying the teachers on their training progression as well as their feedback on it, but also doing very simple things such as scanning the barcodes on soap dispensers and the books to let every community or community leader know that their schools did receive the soap dispensers and the needed textbooks. And again, technology for this is quite simple. It's always done by a survey, digital survey, and then the phone that scanned these barcodes. Now over to the next slide, please. This is a project in Kenya. Again, we've implemented this with the Ministry of Health during COVID. And it was an interesting aspect to this is that we've tracked not only the locations or helped the government to track not only locations and services provided in specific health centers, but also the preparedness level, right? So there was an instantaneous feedback that was collected from these public health centers on the preparedness level during COVID and during some of the administration of COVID vaccines, but also on staffing, on environmental issues and waste management in these centers. This helped quite a bit with planning during the difficult times, but also in remote supervising how these services are being delivered. Over to the next slide, please. Here I wanted to focus in the next two slides. I wanted to very briefly focus because we're running a little bit out of time before we close on how this all comes to why. So once we know where and what, the why becomes more and more important, and what's next becomes more and more important. So for the next two slides, I will talk about Yemen and then Somalia case, where we've used the granular data that we received from our UN partners in Yemen, for instance, on how these solar panels were built from non-existent to midway progression to the finalization, and then layered these project data with the data on conflicts that we've gotten from ACLED, data from malnutrition, data on displaced people and refugees. And we helped our internal World Bank team to look at the data in a holistic way to see, are we focusing for example, development on education in the hotspots of conflict or where most concentration of IDPs are, or is there a need for us to look at other regions? It also helped the team to look at the risks associated with the conflict and evolving risks, and to monitor what are the hotspots of the conflict occurring and where are they sort of subsiding. So this is the why and pattern identification, and we've used ArcGIS for this quite successfully. It's still work in progress because we're continuously updating the data and ensuring that it feeds into the decision making. So we're connecting that side of the why and how, what's next. And in the next slide, you'll see a very, if you could go into the next slide, example of Somalia, where we've built a similar dashboard, but more on understanding the conflict dynamics in various sectors that we're being involved, allowing for a strategic oversight on these sectors vis-a-vis the conflict unfolding, but also the hotspots again of malnutrition, the issues that are happening on the ground. Every dot that you see is a project, sub-project location, and most of the time associated with a picture that's taken on the ground for this particular sub-project, but also overlaid with, again, data on whether this particular sub-project is surrounded with a conflict and issues that is around it. Like, again, is there a school in there? Is there a water well? Is there a sanitation spot? Is there a health center? So just giving that holistic view of where we are as a development project vis-a-vis what's around it as a pattern. Lastly, I wanted to finish and then hand it over to Mokshana from the World Bank, who will give you more practical examples of how she used the GEMS tools and initiative. But before I close, I wanted to go to the next slide, please, and just to reiterate what Sukaina said, that we can't do this alone. And we are constantly building partnerships on the ground with local agencies, but also with larger development agencies and bilateral organizations. So from our side, we're always happy to share our tools, technologies, methods. When we do trainings on capacity building, we invite the partners, post-free, obviously, to train the trainer, with the hope that at some point, when we are in these fragile countries where institutional capacity already thinly stretched, we can actually come together and share the data and come together and build something as one. And so that instead of further stretching the capacities on the ground, we're actually building something together and partnering and adding to the capacity building together. So let me stop here. I hope I'm not too much over time, and hand it over to Mokshana from the World Bank. Thank you so much today, and happy to take questions in the chat.
Thank you, Bahar. If we can move to the next slide. So I'll be speaking a little bit about how we have used the Geo-Enabling monitoring systems for environmental and social monitoring. As you may all know, the World Bank has an environmental and social management framework, and we also have safeguards where we ensure that our project activities are sustainable and do not do any harm or cause any environmental and social impacts to the environment and also our beneficiaries. If we can move to the next slide. So just to give a bit of context in terms of Maldives and Sri Lanka, which is in the South Asia region, we have had a lot of challenges in terms of doing monitoring in the conventional method. So this is a key reason why we reached out to the GEMS team, who have been very supportive in terms of providing training and also technical support to us over the course of the last couple of years to actually roll out the GEMS monitoring methodology for the environmental and social compliance aspects. In the Maldives, the challenge has been, when you think Maldives, everybody thinks it's a very small country, but it's actually very vastly geographically spread out. It's about 1,192 coral islands, and it's spread across 26 atolls. About 188 of these islands where we work in are inhabited, and it stretches across almost 871 kilometers. From the north to the south. Travel is also very expensive in the Maldives because you have only two options. You either travel by air or you travel by sea, so speedboat. So it's very expensive to travel from one part of the island to the other. And travel time also takes a lot of time. Typically, the shortest distance is a 30-minute boat ride to sometimes 2 to 3 hours to actually reach some of the islands in the farther atolls we work in. Weather is also a dynamic issue in the Maldives, and often it's difficult to kind of catch domestic flights or travel via sea due to weather conditions. So it's extremely critical that we used a remote monitoring system where we could get georeference but accurate data from the field to continue monitoring our safeguards and environmental and social compliance aspects in project sites across the Maldives real time. The same for Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka also is a small island, but it has very variant geographical terrain from the coast to the central highlands, which are mountainous. So travel time typically takes, 30 minutes in the capital city region to 5 to 8 hours to reach some of the other provinces where we work in. Field offices are often not well equipped to travel, so vehicles and human capacity to travel often is difficult. Some projects have hundreds to thousands of project sites spread across 9 provinces, so sporadically spread out. And of course, terrain changes also makes it difficult to travel often. So typically what we notice is monitoring the conventional way using paper-based reports was becoming a challenge. And we thought specifically during the COVID period, how can we really monitor compliance, because our projects were still ongoing even during the COVID time. So that's where we move to the GEMS methodology, and it was really successful, and I'll share some of the examples in the next couple of slides. If we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the typical steps we undertook to kind of take this forward is we work with the GEMS team to do training for both the bank team as well as our PMU teams. And we did a pilot in the Maldives using one of the solid waste management projects that the bank's Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economic Global Practice is leading. And what we basically did was use the simple steps of creating a COBO toolbox account, to developing standard questionnaires for environmental and social monitoring, and then piloting it in country with our project staff to see how well it works. And lucky for us, it was quite successful, and there was good uptake from the client entities and the ministries we work with. So then we were able to take it forward to kind of achieve some of the things we have. Can we move to the next slide? So we used the data collection strategy here, which was quite simple. We have a PMU environmental and social specialist typically in our project management units. So we work with them to develop a standard environmental and social management plan monitoring form that looked at all the aspects, all the mitigation measures that we have undertaken for a certain sub-project. And then this was deployed out to our implementing agency. So here in this particular project, we work with island councils that are based in the farther atolls and the islands. And they were able to actually travel to the sites and then collect data for us on how compliant things are in terms of the environmental and social side. This information then flows to a central database, which can then be accessed by both the bank team, the Environmental Protection Agency in the Maldives, and the project management units real time to see how things are going in the field, how work is progressing, and then to provide recommendations on guidance on any rectification measures or actions that need to be taken. If you can click once more so that we get the last point on the slide. Thank you very much. This data can easily be downloaded and we use the COBO platform. So we really didn't need to create our own backend or a platform. We still use the COBO platform to actually visualize the data coming in real time and look at the georeference data. And this has been very helpful for us because it didn't require for us to, spend additional funding to set up our own platforms. If we can move to the next slide. There were some challenges. It was not that this was completely easy. Some of the challenges we had, for instance, was the initial form building did take a little bit of time on our side. We had certain errors, etc. But the GEMS team has been very supportive throughout to kind of help us deal with some of the technical kinks that can come up, because this is, of course, an IT-based system and technical kinks sometimes can be an issue. We had to do some initial data cleanups, kind of understand the connectivity issues that can come up, the issues with using various devices. All this we were able to kind of trial during the COVID pandemic. And the training, luckily, because the GEMS team also offers training virtually, even during the COVID pandemic, we were able to kind of do these trainings with island councils, people based in remote areas, etc. So it really helped us kind of overcome the challenge of not being able to do face-to-face training and trials. So, of course, the tool keeps evolving and continuous support from the GEMS team has really helped us, because now we can translate forms into local languages. even get email alerts, use photos in the form. So it has really been helpful. And I think one of the things I want to share is when working with GEMS, it's very critical to have an open mind and be open to kind of work with your teams and be champions to kind of deal with some of the challenges you will have. If we can move to the next slide. So what really helped us is we had a lot of leadership and will coming from our task team leaders, our managers, and also a lot of cross collaboration and support between the GEMS team, country management units, and even the leaders of the various ministries and PMUs we work with. And that was really critical for us to take this work forward. Training and trialing, I think, is very critical. So the training was what gave us the basis to actually use this tool in the versatile methods that I'll share as examples in a little bit. And also trialing, which really helped us understand what are some of the kinks, what are the problems we can have, and then overcome those and moving forward. Learning by doing is, I think, the best way that we were able to make work things. We kind of didn't rely entirely on training. We tried to do forms, kind of trial things, even during the pandemic period. And this helped us then learn and tailor the data collection process so that for our instruments and for the purpose we want to use it, it makes it more versatile and applicable on the ground. If we can move it to the next slide. So what we did was we developed a standard ENS monitoring form, which can be used by any team. Because environmental and social monitoring management plans are typically very standard documents. So this monitoring form was a standard document that is now tailored and used by all our project teams. We've also recently developed a standard environmental and social compliance auditing form, which can be used for audits, for environmental and social audits in line with bank projects to check how projects are doing in terms of performance. So there's a lot of things we can do with the tool. We can have site-specific questions, geo-reference questions. We can use something called skip logic to, make sure forms are not very long and cumbersome, and people really respond to, key questions that we want them to respond to. So it's a very versatile tool that you can play around with and make, your forms adaptable to what the purpose of the data collection process is. If we can move to the next slide. So I think this is what's most important, the various examples of how we've used it. In Sri Lanka, we've had a slow and steady momentum. We used the standard environmental and social monitoring form that was developed in the Maldives for projects in Sri Lanka. It has been widely replicated and used across the portfolio. So we used it also for implementation completion reporting. So in projects that are closing, we had a climate resilience project that closed during the COVID period, and it was challenging for people to actually go to the field. So we wanted to see how the final sub-projects that were undertaking civil works in the field were going on and whether they have closed properly. And there we used the GEMS methodology, a GEMS-based form, to actually report on the implementation completion reporting. We have a water supply and sanitation improvement project in Sri Lanka, which uses it actively for environmental and social compliance monitoring. We have a local government development project, which became a bit of a problem project over the COVID period because nobody could go to the field to monitor. So we actually now have used the GEM system to do an environmental and social compliance audit and map all the project sites using the GEMS methodology. We've also used it in emergency response. As many of you may know, Sri Lanka had an economic crisis and underwent a lot of issues in country, which kind of required the bank to come in on emergency response. And here too, we've used the COVID methodology from the environmental and social compliance side, from the grievance redressal recording side, to actually monitor the implementation of the emergency response activities. Currently, we are also using a new instrument called Environmental and Social Code of Practice, and we've also developed a monitoring form for environmental and social codes of practice, which since 2022 is now being implemented in some of the projects here in the Sri Lanka portfolio. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So Maldives has actually been our trial and testing ground, and that's where most of the learning has kind of spread to Sri Lanka as well. We've used the tool to actually do a healthcare waste management planning assessment, where we reached out to all the healthcare facilities in the Maldives during the COVID pandemic time to collect data on the status of their healthcare waste management activities, so that through the COVID project, we could then tailor the support they need on healthcare waste management planning, equipment, and other needs. So this was somewhat of a needs assessment. We have 3 renewable energy projects that are using the GEMS to do grievance redressal, stakeholder feedback collection, and ESF, environmental and social framework monitoring. And they also are a little bit more innovative. They use QR codes in their signboards so people can easily access the grievance redressal forms or stakeholder feedback forms. So it's pretty cool and working quite well. COBO is also being used to collect implementation and compliance monitoring via supervision consultants. So now for some of our projects, we have civil work supervision consultants. So they have also been trained, and they give us feedback on the compliance of environmental and social aspects through COBO forms using the GEMS methodology. In the Maldives, we also have a large project where we support a regional waste management facility, which operates an incinerator and undertakes waste management activities. And we also use the GEMS methodology here for operational monitoring of environmental and social management, so how the site operates. And this is linked with the Environmental Protection Agency of the Maldives, so that they, who are the responsible agency for environmental monitoring in the country, can also access and continue post the project monitoring using the same tool. The Maldives Ministry of Environment has a waste management department that, through the training provided by the COBO team, also use COBO in their day-to-day activities, and they've used this to do a regional waste data collection strategy, where they are collecting data region by region on the waste from the island councils, from resorts, etc. So they have a national database on solid waste management that can help them in their decision-making projects and planning in relation to solid waste. My global practice also undertook an country environmental analysis in the Maldives, and we used the COBO methodology to conduct a tourism resort survey on the environment and climate challenges that the resort and tourism sector are undertaking, and we were able to collect a lot of rich data using this methodology in a very short span of time, just 2 months, to actually feed into the study that was conducted. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this is actually how some of the data from the COBO platform looks like, where we collected information from tourist resorts to understand, how they're doing in terms of their environmental sustainability actions. What are some of the challenges that they're facing in terms of environmental aspects, like coastal impacts due to climate change or solid waste related issues that they face. And we were able to collect a lot of rich data, which we can, over time, redo this survey and see how the trends are in terms of environmental and climate related context for resorts in the Maldives. If we can move to the next slide. So this is actually a photograph from the COBO platform from the Bandhu Waste Regional Management Facility. And one of the good things is, through COBO, you can also check when your project staff has gone to the sites, if they've actually conducted monitoring, when the forms have come in. So you also have a good verification method to see whether your project staff are actually going to the field and how they're doing in terms of feeding back data into the loop. If we can go to the next slide. So these are some quick pictures on compliance monitoring. If we can go to the next slide. Once again, photographs from the COBO platform and how data kind of flows in and how you can map project sites. The next slide, which I think is the final. So I won't speak much here. This is once again an example of how a typical form that has been done for waste data collection and how the data can be presented to others as well. If we can move to the next slide. So I won't speak much here, but really quickly, this is a very versatile tool and can be used in various ways, not only for bank projects. What we are doing now is kind of working with client agencies and ministries to mainstream this into their monitoring activities. So we're working with environmental protection agencies and ministries to kind of help them be more efficient and cost effective using this tool for their monitoring activities as well. That's it from my side. Thank you very much. And I'd like to hand over to Dr. Abdul Ali, Senior Hydromet Specialist from AgriNet. Thank you very much.
Hi, Dr. Ali, if you are there, could you please activate the camera and microphone? We are not getting a signal.
How? Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I was saying that this presentation is about how AgriNet Regional Center you develop and use seasonal and sub-seasonal forecasts to enhance food security, early warning, and disaster risk reduction in West Africa with the support of SERVIR West Africa. Next slide, please. So the presentation will be in two steps. In a first step, I will provide a short introductions on how seasonal and sub-seasonal services are used in a concrete manner to strengthen resilience in West Africa. And then in a second manner, in a second step, my colleague Shukla will provide what are the achievements and contributions under SERVIR in West Africa. So just a few words on what is AgriNet. I don't know if all of you know AgriNet. So as you can see from the slide, the acronym AgriNet come from agrometeorology, hydrology, and meteorology. And AgriNet is a specialized institution of the Permanent Committee for Drought Control in the Sahel, which is called SILS. And now AgriNet has become the West Africa and Sahel Regional Climate Center, endorsed by ECOWAS and accredited by the World Climate Meteorological Organizations. So we have three key words in our missions. The first one is providing information services in different areas, including climate change, water resources management, agriculture, food security, natural resources. And the second one is to provide services on training in the same area. And then the first one is to provide applied research to support product innovations and development. Next slide, please. The AgriNet is based in Niamey, Niger, as you can see it from the slide. So from this slide, you can see how and why seasonal and sub-seasonal forecasts are very key for West Africa. You will see that from this slide, we are still facing continuous intensifications of hydroclimate extreme in West Africa. West Africa and Sahel used to face drought conditions, as you can see it from the red part of this graphic. But as you know, right now, we are facing high interannual variability from year to year. We can have a lot of rainfall and a very low rainfall for the total rainy seasons. But in addition to this high interannual variability, we are facing a very dramatic dry spell situations during the rainy season. So that means we need to provide indications about the upcoming rainy seasons, what will be the total rainfalls, but this is not enough. We also need to provide how will be the dry spell conditions during the upcoming rainy seasons. It is the combinations of these both informations that will help managing the rainy seasons. And to combine these two conditions, we need both seasonal and sub-seasonal forecasts to deal with the situations. Next slide, please. So In the area of seasonal and subseasonal services in West Africa, you can see that we are providing these services in the framework of what we call the regional climate outlook. And we have two in West Africa and Sahel. The first one is called crises, and it covers the Sahelian and the Sudano-Sahelian area. This is the area when we have only one rainy season during the whole years. So, and the rainy seasons from the north to south last 3 to 5 and 6 months. And so providing the information about the upcoming rainy seasons are very critical for this area. The second one is the Gulf of Guinea, where we have 2 rainy seasons, and the Regional Climate Outlook Forum for this Gulf of Guinea is called Fragility. So it is very important to highlight this climate information because more than 80% of the crop are rainfall in this area. So very sensitive to climate variability and climate change. Next slide, please. So these are what we are providing as seasonal tailored product for West Africa. The different stakeholders in the regions that includes the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services, the regional climate institutions, the disaster risk reduction agencies. So all these stakeholders come together and they use Earth observation satellite data, they use model output, mainly the North multimodal ensemble output, and they use this information to provide tailored seasonal forecast for the regions. As you can see from the different image here, it goes from the total rainfall for the upcoming seasons above to the onset. That means the seasons is going to start early or late. The third one is the dry spell forecast for the upcoming seasons. The fourth is the cessation date of the rain seasons, and the last one is the forecast of the discharge from the different river basins in the regions. So this information are really key to manage the seasons. Before the rain seasons start, all the stakeholders, especially the farmers, are waiting for these information to have some guidelines on what course of land to be used for the upcoming season. Because if, according to the behavior of the rain season, they can use high or low land, people need this information to use the type of crops variety to consider for the upcoming seasons. At which levels people have to commit in the preparedness of risk, especially flooding. For example, moving the flood-prone area because the rainage is expected to be really very floody. Also, these informations are very important, specifically to make more investment, because if the regions have some opportunities, so this can push different actors to put more investment and to take benefit of the regions, where if it is dry and it is difficult, people can less invest in the upcoming seasons. So we have developed this product with the support of SERVIRs, which consider the seasonal forecast as one of the services to be supported in West Africa. So next slide, please. Just to briefly show this recent result from a survey made by a World Bank funded project, which is called Food System Resilience Program. We made a recent survey to see what is the level of the use of the different services provided by agreement. And you can see that more than 74% of the different more than 70% of the different service of the different users of agreement use seasonal forecast. Next slide, please. Okay, we are also, as you know, according to the current behavior of climate variability and climate change in West Africa, flood monitoring and flood forecasting is one of the top priority in West Africa, and we are working to providing for the regions flood forecasting system, and this is also supported by service by both improving the existing one, which is FANFAR, and providing additional and complementary system by using the e-file system. Next slide, please, because the time is very short. Before concluding my presentation, just to highlight that by using the different model output satellite observation data, we managed to provide some monitoring and providing some information in non-accessible area in West Africa, because as you know, West Africa is facing right now with a huge civil insecurity, so many areas are not accessible for the government staff, and we are, as you can see it from this slide, that we are using the observations and model output to monitor the situations in terms of crop protections, in terms of cultivated area. So these are very important to provide information for decision making in this non-accessible area. So the last slide is a conclusion, is to say that, well, please, the last slide, please. So in conclusion, it is to say, despite the fact that subseasonal forecasts are very key, as you can see it from the different applications I shared with you, these services are, the subseasonal services are not fully operational right now in the region. We are still working to improve the forecast, to improve these services, and that is why collaborations and support is very key. And this makes the transition with what have been achieved under the SERVIR West Africa with of my colleague Shukra. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abduli, very much. Well, yeah, so this part of the presentation is going to be about this SERVIR Applied Science Team supported project that tries to address this need of subseasonal forecasting in West Africa. Next slide, please. I assume most of you already know about SERVIR, but just in case, SERVIR is a joint initiative of USAID and NASA, and it leverages the key strengths of both of those organizations and try to address the overlapping goals such as poverty reduction, resilience, and societal benefit from space. SERVIR works with several different hubs across the world, which work to co-develop and implement projects in those parts of the world. SERVIR also enjoys collaboration with private sector, other US government partners, and NGOs, and so on. This particular project, as Dr. Abduli mentioned before, is in collaboration with SERVIR West Africa. Next slide, please. So at the core of this project, because of the goal of this project being is the basically production and dissemination of subseasonal climate forecast, we are making use of the dynamical subseasonal climate forecasting. And by dynamical, I mean the forecasts that are available generated by global climate models. So in this case, we are using North American Multi-Model Ensemble, which is funded by NOAA, and that uses about 5 to 6 different models and provides subseasonal forecasts that go out to 30 to 45 days in future. Those forecasts cover entire globe. They are available weekly, typically by Thursday of a week, and their temporal resolution is daily. So you can basically get weather forecast for each day over the next 30 to 45 days. In this particular example, we're showing rainfall anomaly forecasts from each of the individual sub-X climate models. And on the top, we are showing the multi-model average. And basically, for most of our forecasting products, we are making use of the multi-model product just because multi-model average of these models tend to be more skillful. Next slide, please. So in the example that I showed before, those global climate model forecasts, they are available at about 100 kilometer by 100 kilometer spatial resolution, which admittedly is very coarse for making any decisions. So a key innovation of this project is try to bias correct and downscale those forecasts from 100 kilometer to about 5 kilometer and so on, and also put together a set of different forecasting products that are more directly useful for decisions. We call them level 3 and level 4 products. So just as an example, on the left here, I'm showing example of rainfall forecast that we provide, example of consecutive dry days, which is particularly very important for West African agriculture, and also a forecast of reference ET, which is evaporative demand, and temperature, which has the implications in both in terms of agriculture, pastoralists, and also health impacts. But on the right, I'm showing two currently in prototype stage forecasting product, which are closer to the decisions that are needed to be made in terms of food insecurity. So on the top is the forecasting product that shows the crop water stress forecast, and on the bottom is a forecasting product that shows the water point level forecast that covers both West and Eastern Africa. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to mention two particular use cases of these high resolution subseasonal climate forecasts. One is through AgriMet. AgriMet provides access to these forecasts through their website, and an example of that is shown here. And they also include these forecasts in their decadal briefing. And through that inclusion of the forecast in the decadal briefing, these forecasts make it to the regional and national bat agencies, NGOs, and other end users in the ECOWAS countries that includes about 19 countries in the region. Next slide, please. AgriMet also provides access to these forecasts to their regional partners, particularly in this instance, these forecasts are made available to a project called Monitoring and Forecast of Intra-Seasonal Variability over Africa, and that is in partnership with several European research organizations. Next slide, please. In addition to AgriMet, we're also working with Plant Village, which is a USAID's the Feed the Future Innovation Lab. And through our collaboration with Plant Village, we are providing access to these forecasts to millions of farmers in Burkina Faso and Kenya. And basically, the Plant Village employs a AAA model, which includes algorithmic agricultural advice, and part of that is based on weather forecast messaging, and that's where these subseasonal forecasts come very handy. Next slide, please. So this is an example of how on the left here is a map of the forecasting product that we provide, which covers most of West Africa, and that map works as an input to the product that the Plant Village team provides in Burkina Faso, which is shown by the map on the right. And in Burkina Faso, our estimate is that this kind of forecasting product is reaching up to 12 million people. And in Kenya, especially in the arid and semi-arid counties, it's reaching up to 8 to 9 million farmers. Next slide, please. And just I wanted to say that there are several mediums through which these forecasts are provided to the farmers. They include YouTube videos, radio and TV programs, and also through individuals which are referred to as warriors who provide access to these forecasts through individual widgets or group discussions. Next slide, please. I also just wanted to provide a sense of the type of decisions that these forecasts are aiming to help. Those decisions can include the decision for migration, depending on the water availability, decisions for vaccination or preventive measures for livestock, pests, and disease, and also implementation of adaptive measures for diversifying livelihood, investing in water harvesting technologies, and also management of resources. more equitably and which can prevent potential conflicts in case of water scarcity and so on. Next slide, please. So here is just a few quotes from some of the farmers and end users, just to highlight that these forecasts are being used for many different types of decisions, such as when to plant cassava for a cassava SOS project, and how much water might be needed for irrigation, and so on. And also for pastoralist community, this can also help decide if there is any investment that needs to be made for, say, harvesting rain water. Next slide, please. So basically, in the end, I just wanted to say that this project, in collaboration with AgriMet, UCSB, and SERVIR AST, is providing access to subseasonal forecast, which is one of the key climate service needs in West Africa. And through our partnership with AgriMet, these forecasts are being disseminated to several national, regional agencies through the decadal briefings that AgriMet provides. And through our partnership with Plant Village, we are able to disseminate these high-resolution climate forecasts to millions of users, mainly farmers in Burkina Faso and Kenya. This is a new service, so we expect continued improvement in this forecasting product, and we're hoping to make the skill improvement in this forecast as well. Next slide, please. And here I just wanted to acknowledge all the partners that are part of this work, and also support from USAID, NASA, SERVIR AST, and other agencies. So thanks very much. And with that, I would like to hand it over to next presenter, Kyle Alden. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Really excited to see so many folks on the line, and thanks for the previous presentations. My name is Kyle Alden. I am the geospatial specialist at the USAID's Bureau for Resilience, Environment, and Food Security, and I work on the Feed the Future initiative. For folks who don't know, the Feed the Future initiative is the US government's global hunger and food security initiative. And today I'm going to talk about some lessons learned using a sort of GIS-based decision support tool that's meant to inform Feed the Future planning. And so you'll notice the first two presentations we're looking at immediate responses, some near-term actions, and in this one we're really trying to think about how do we inform planning over a sort of a 5-year period. Next slide. So as a little bit of background. So last year, the Feed the Future initiative selected 20 target countries. In each of these target countries, so this year, in all 20 target countries, each country is writing a plan that plans out how they're going to implement the initiative over the next 5 years. And part of that plan is selecting a subnational area called a zone of influence. And you'll hear me call this the ZOI throughout the rest of the presentation. There are two key facets of this zone of influence, the ZOI. So the ZOI is where we're going to focus the Feed the Future country portfolio and aim to have the largest impact on poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. And the ZOI is also where we're going to measure progress at the population level. So we perform population-based surveys in these zones of influence to measure progress towards a whole suite of indicators, but specifically poverty, hunger, and malnutrition are what we're really focused on. And the initiative as a whole has an ambition of reducing poverty by 20% and stunning by 20% during this phase of the period. So next slide. So for our sort of task here was to work to build a tool that folks who are not geospatial specialists could use to help make these planning decisions. Our three key goals were to streamline this process of zone of influence selection and writing the targeting section of each country plan, to incorporate learning and evidence. So some of this evidence that we've been hearing our other presenters talk about into the selection, provide a framework to quickly validate whether they're aligned with our criteria, which I'll dig into in a second. And then there's sort of two functions. So first, where should a ZOI be based on standard data? And then second is to sort of interactively build zones of influence. So we put together a tool that is internal to USAID, but I want to talk about the criteria, sort of what it looks like, and some lessons learned that that other GIS professionals might be able to use. So next slide. Digging into the criteria, first, we're interested in areas with opportunities for sustainable impact. We asked our partners in each of our 20 target countries to consider this as an exclusion criteria. So they have a sense of areas where they don't think there are opportunities for sustainable impact. And so these might be areas with high levels of conflict, protected areas, or for another reason, we asked them to exclude those. Second, we looked at level of need, and we defined this as areas with high levels of poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. Third, we looked at potential for agriculture-led growth. This was a bit more country specific. So one country might be interested in market opportunities. Another country might be interested in improving production of specific crops or specific value chains. And so we really tried to work with our in-country partners to develop a map that looks at where there are opportunities for agriculture-led growth. And then the final thing we included was right sizing to the budget and approach. And so we recognize that our budgets at USAID can't do everything, and we want to make sure that we're able to have an impact. So we use some recent research about the cost of impact to drive a sort of calculation about how big of an area we might be able to work in. Next slide. So those are all, pretty quantitative criteria. We also have some qualitative and context criteria that we thought were really important for our mission or our partners in country to consider. First is whether or not there are existing U.S. government resources. So if there are already Feed the Future programs, if there are other relevant programs that USAID or other interagency U.S. government partners are doing, we want to make sure we're coordinating with those and make sure we're operating in places to leverage the work that they're doing. Second is ensuring that there are places that have either host government, local government, donor, or other partner, local partner commitments. So we want to consider, the whole suite of actors that are acting in any given area in this same space around food security and hunger. And finally, we have a couple of administrative criteria. So we prefer non-contiguous areas, and we want folks to align with existing administrative units. Next slide. So the process sort of said, at each post, identify some key stakeholders. We had them attend an overview session that I did. Then asked each post to gather information, so about their expected budget, about some data sets, and then we come together and go through the tool that I have, which is Tableau based, but as I mentioned is internal. I'm going to go through some screenshots of what it looks like next, though, for a sort of facilitated session to talk through how we might select these zones of influence. Next, we worked back and forth over email or through other calls to refine the definition of our zones, and then asked our mission partners to submit a proposal and try to be really support them as we went through this process and make it an iterative process. So next, so to sort of show you how this looks, we had some standard data that we put into the tool to represent these criteria that I mentioned before. First, for opportunities for sustainable impact, you can exclude any administrative units in the country that you're looking at. Second, when we're looking at level of need, we had built-in data on poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. For poverty, we used the relative wealth index as a proxy of poverty. For stunting, we used mapping child growth failure across low and lower middle income countries and looked at the 2019 stunting estimates that were modeled. And then for hunger, we took data from the Hunger Map Live data source on the prevalence of insufficient food consumption. From there, this is a really important thing that we learned through the process is that, oftentimes there are better, either higher quality, higher precision, or higher or more recent data sets that we might include in any given country situation that might not be available across all 20 of our countries. So we had this override button that you can sort of see up in the top right that allowed us to override any of these given data sets and replace them with a better data set. So for example, if there was a recent demographics and health survey that had recent data on stunting, we could include that instead of this modeled version as it was directly measured and potentially more recent. From there, we combine our poverty, hunger, and malnutrition data into sort of a need theme map after normalizing the data. So next slide. We take the same approach on potential for ag-led growth. In this case, our three key data sets were looking at alignment with RFS priority farming systems. Second was looking at historic yield achievement, and third was looking at suitability for specific crops. But I don't have this on the slide. There was also a sort of a fourth option where we could come up with our own map of areas with the highest opportunities for ag-led growth, and we did this in a lot of countries. And they were focused on things like, are there market opportunities in any given area, and trying to bring together all sorts of data to try to look at ag opportunity. Again, we combine those three data sets and put them into an ag opportunity score. And next slide. The third part of the tool comes together and it combines that need score, the ag opportunity score, and then picks sort of a right size based on this calculation we have on what we think the least cost to achieve our poverty reduction goals might be. So we say that in this given area, or in Burkina Faso, for example, we'd recommend sort of 3 different areas. If we think that we can operate near that least cost, we think you can operate in all of this area, and all of these areas would be good for a zone of influence. If we think it's really expensive, we might suggest limiting to the smaller blue area, for example, is how this sort of works. We really tried to caveat that this was a first output of the tool and is probably not going to be the zone that any given country is going to suggest, but it's really just looking at areas that might be good for a zone of influence and about the right size. So if we go to the next slide, from there, the sort of second and more fun part of the tool was that we had this scenario building part of the tool where users could come in, and I sort of showed it here where you can select areas with your cursor. You can add in the results of that initial model. You can add in specific administrative units and hit run analysis. And so what this does is it gives you a sense of in the area that you are building a scenario for, what is the current population? What do we know about poverty? What do we know about a stunting in that area, and to see whether the area that you selected through this qualitative process aligns with those primary criteria. And sort of how we envisioned this and how this worked in quite a few of the countries that we worked with was we'd draw some areas on a map and say, let's add this area, remove this area, back and forth until we sort of tried to get together on a proposal for a zone of influence. And each time we built one of these scenarios, we were able to check whether or not it aligned with the criteria. It was really helpful for saying, I know that we have this great local partner in a given area. Can we add that one in? And if we have to remove an area, what would it look like if we did X, Y, and Z? So next slide. So a couple lessons learned to wrap this up. One thing that was really, really important for us was having really clear documentation about how we should think about this selection process. So our guidance stemmed from the Global Food Security Act and the Global Food Security Strategy, and we worked together internally to come up with a really strong guidance document that drove a lot of these decisions about how the tool and how the process would work, and that was sort of really key to getting everybody on the same page. Second, as I mentioned before, customization of data sets was really key to getting user buy-in. So when we had a better data set, making sure that we could really quickly incorporate that data was really something that helps drive these decisions. Next. So the scenario building and scenario evaluation process was also really key. It allowed us to take into account qualitative data that we don't necessarily always think of as being these high-end spatial information, but people have a sense of, people have evidence for, have learning about, and so making sure that we're taking advantage of all the data that's out there, and then all of the experience that folks have in any given country. And then finally, we have this anchoring bias thing. So when we see a result, and if it doesn't align with our expectations, it often leads us to potentially write off an entire process. And so this is something that we need to think about further going forward, and I'd love to hear people's opinions of, is when we show a result, when we show an initial option, how we make sure we caveat that appropriately to say that we're not, from Washington deciding what you're going to do in your country. We're just, giving an example of what a good result might look like. And so with that, I think we have a tiny bit of time for Q&A. And so I guess next slide, I want to say thank you all for being here. Feel free to reach out to me, and we'll hand it over to Alejandro.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to all of our presenters for some really, really interesting thoughts there. We only have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask a question that's going to go for all of our speakers today, and we'll go around. But just a reminder to everyone who's been sending us their questions, that they're being answered mostly in the Q&A app here on your Zoom, and also in the chat function. But the questions that haven't been answered, any of those remaining questions, we will send via a blog that will be published as part of our theme month. So with that, I'm going to go with our question, which is very simple. Can you please share at least 3 best digital GIS practices? And we'll go around in the same order that we did our presentation. So Bahar, I think you would be first.
Apologies, as I was trying to unmute and put my camera on while typing a response. The questions. So I think from our experience, right, we've been trying to use a few things, but one thing that strikes us the most is that for safety and for the ease of it, we're using the phones to collect data. So this is one of the things. And then there was a question that I was actually trying to type on about, what do you do with this data, right? Do you stage it? Yes. So one of the other GIS practices, once you collected this data, what do you do with this? There was a question on validation. Absolutely. Another practice is make sure you look at the data, you validate before you start analyzing. The validation and the data cleanup is very critical and important in the process. So we definitely learned some lessons, but also have been working very closely with those who work with us to ensure that there's that data cleanup and validation process is strongly built. The third part to this is the data safety and the data security. So we recommend always have a process and a plan that you share with those who you work on, how the data is going to be stored and shared and who owns the data, but also not at least for us in the World Bank, we always say that collecting the personal identifiable information is a big risk. So we always advise against that and also build some knowledge around it and share that with our clients. So I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. And I can pass it on to Mokshana, please.
Sure. So just an example, because your question was on the GIS systems also, right? So the data that we collect, we also use a lot in environmental impact assessments and social impact assessments. So the data that we collect through COBO can easily be overlaid with some of the existing GIS-based maps, other georeference information we have. So we also try to correlate some of the data with, for instance, there's this new integrated biodiversity assessment tool, or IBAC, that IUCN uses. So we've been correlating some of the site data we collect to do analysis, for instance, for our ESIAs on protected species, etc. I just wanted to add one more point. Bahar actually indicated data security, right? And sometimes it's not only personal information data, but for us working in the environmental field, when we collect data on protected areas or protected species, this data also becomes very secure, and we need to kind of look at how we put this data out to public platforms, etc. Because of course they can be misused for various reasons as well. Or to others. Thank you.
And Dr. Abdul Ali.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see one question, how the seasonal forecasts are communicated and applicable farmers first this forecast. So I just want to say that the communications are made at different levels and by different actors, where when the seasonal forecasts are produced, there are different institutions at national levels, Met Service and all other institutions that contribute to the communications and the extensions of the information to the farmers. We have the extensions, and we have also many other NGOs and organizations that contribute. So the communications of the seasonal forecast is not only the duty or the activities or of one organization. Several organizations contribute to the communications of seasonal forecast. So at which level do they trust to this forecast? Although they request sometimes more details because they want to have more details, spatially information regarding seasonal forecast and also details in time. But when we conduct survey, seasonal forecast is the first number one climate services that are used by the farmers. So I think the fact that the seasonal forecast has the high level of using by the farmers is an indication of their trust in this in these services. So thank you very much.
And Dr. Shad, any last thoughts there?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the question. I think as regards to the data that we are using and producing, I think I would say the best practice should include open access and reproducibility, and that's what we try to do, is to provide access publicly through FTP and other secure means to as many users as possible. And reproducibility allows so for in our case, we are providing data for West and East Africa, but reproducibility would allow anyone to replicate the same kind of data sets for different regions. And finally, I would just say that in terms of best practices, it's especially when we are trying to design any service using data, we should keep in mind the context, the decisions that we need to address, and trying to make sure that our data is as close to the decisions as possible. Thank you.
Awesome. Last comment from Kyle.
So I would reiterate the last point made there, that we really need to be clearly aligned with the decision that's being made. So just, grabbing data or putting data out there that it's useful and cool is not always going to make us make better decisions. And then the other point that I really want to make is around documentation. One thing that we've found is really, really important is having strong documentation that's not only in sort of academic language, but also in sort of language that non-GIS or Earth observations experts can understand. And so, to really help folks understand the value of the data, and sometimes we want to make sure all those caveats are there, but we also sometimes need a 1 or 2 word or 2 sentence, really quick, clear, concise set of documentation about the data we use.
All right, awesome. Thank you, everyone. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Carrie Stokes for some closing remarks.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, as we've talked about today, the world is experiencing challenges with more frequency and intensity, but at the same time, we're experiencing a revolution in geospatial technologies. From ride-hailing services to tracking supply chains to monitoring and tracking disease outbreaks, and the examples that we heard today, these mapping capabilities have become part of our daily life. I am very passionate about these advancements in geospatial because I believe they are critical to addressing the world's most pressing challenges. I'm the chief geographer at USAID and the director of our Geo Center, which is a team of geographers and data analysts with remote sensing and mapping expertise. We work mostly internally to advise our colleagues, both in Washington, D.C. and our many field missions around the world. We work in about 100 countries around the world. And my team applies what we call a geographic approach to development to inform decisions about where to prioritize placement of our international development programs. In addition to the internal analyses that we conduct to generate insights for our colleagues about the kinds of decisions they make, we also lead a program called Youth Mappers, which empowers university students with digital mapping and leadership skills. This program is active in about 380 universities in 72 countries and puts local, often overlooked communities on the map. OpenStreetMap, to be exact, if you've ever heard of OpenStreetMap. It's the largest open digital map of the world, and it's a digital public good that is crowdsourced from the bottom up. In addition to giving undermapped communities a voice, the geospatial data generated by Youth Mappers addresses food security, climate adaptation, health, public safety, electrification of health clinics, and access to internet for schools, many different topics that mapping data can help in the development of local economies. The thousands and thousands of young people who are applying their mapping skills for Youth Mappers to solve local challenges is really inspiring, and it gives me hope, despite the many challenges we are facing in the world today. So these technologies are helping decision makers who often have insufficient information and limited technical capacity at the moment when they really need it. Our speakers from the World Bank highlighted the GEMS tool, which helps to remotely monitor projects in places that are very hard to reach. And we heard from colleagues with the SERVIR West Africa program, who work through a consortium of local partners to support decision-making. The SERVIR partnership, which combines NASA's capabilities with USAID's development capabilities, serves more than 45 countries around the world to support locally led efforts to strengthen their climate resilience, food, and water security. I also want to just take this opportunity to let you know there's been a new refresh to the website for SERVIR, and I encourage you to check it out, servirglobal.net. And as we heard from Kyle, the last speaker, USAID is using geospatial technology to guide the US government's initiative to combat global hunger, called Feed the Future. Geospatial data and tools are helping to focus resources in areas that need it most, in areas that we call zones of influence. So what we have seen and heard today is that data sharing and collaboration to harness the strength of different government agencies and non-governments is critical. We've heard about great examples about how these geospatial technologies are being used to support stronger, healthier, and more resilient communities. I want to acknowledge all of our speakers from the World Bank, the SERVIR program, and Feed the Future for sharing these experiences with us. We appreciate also your attention and participation in this event. And I also want to just thank you for engaging on this topic and getting mappy with us, because truly these technologies and data sets and insights that we can gain are part of the solution to addressing some of the greatest challenges we face today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Just last words, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Thanks to our partners at the World Bank GEMS, SERVIR, also ResilienceLinks. We have a newsletter being sent out today, so check out all the interesting resources shared by our panelists and some of our other partners. With that, we will let you guys go. Thank you once again.